51 years ago, on the 30th of April, 1803, the struggling young republic of the Western world purchased from France the vast territory then known as Louisiana. This plaque represents the purchase treaty signing. The price paid, $15 million, was a staggering sum to the United States, and many were the voices raised in protest against such wild extravagance. In 1897, Pierre Chouteau, grandson of Pierre Laclede, the founder of St. Louis, suggested that in 1903, the 100th anniversary of the purchase be fittingly celebrated with a World's Fair. This was the birth of the great idea, the magnificent World's Fair held in St. Louis in 1904. The camera alone preserves in any degree satisfying the story 1,000 chapters long of past, present, and promise of the Louisiana Territory. While the fair was held 50 years ago, motion pictures were little more than a plaything. The assembling of these pictures would have been an almost impossible task without the hearty support of the Missouri Historical Society, the Public Library, and many other public-spirited citizens. The President of the United States at the time of the World's Fair was Theodore Roosevelt. Here we see the President addressing a large crowd in Forest Park. During the Chicago Exposition in 1893, David Orr Francis, President of the World's Fair Association, reminded a congressional committee at Washington, D.C. that in 10 years, an even greater event would be celebrated in St. Louis. On January 11, 1898, 200 St. Louisans met in the old St. Louis Exposition Building, which was on the site of the present Central Public Library, to arrange for the celebration of the Louisiana Purchase. On September 3rd, 1901, President Francis and Chief Architect Isaac S. Taylor placed the stake in the ground at the architectural center that was laid out to develop the greatest World's Fair of all times. Alexander M. Dockery, governor of Missouri at World's Fair time, set aside by proclamation December 20th, 1901 as Louisiana Purchase Day. In the East Room at the White House in Washington, President Roosevelt, surrounded by his cabinet, awaited word from Mr. Francis that all was ready. A few minutes past noon on April 30th, 1904, Mr. Francis touched a key at the fairgrounds, which instantly started the vast machinery, and the great fair was underway. And this was opening day. 190,000 people listened to the President Francis deliver his opening address of welcome to the people from the platform at the base of the Louisiana Monument. The magnificent mansion of Missouri, the palace of hospitality among states, was completely air-conditioned. A military pageant by the West Point cadets was a feature on opening day. The camera caught this scene of one of the largest crowds at rest on the plaza in front of the Palace of Varied Industries. This was the government building from the lagoon, the largest exhibit structure ever erected by federal authorities. Governor Taft, President Francis, and Colonel Edwards at the Philippines colony on a day of celebration. Bishop Nays, Archbishop Glennon, Cardinal Satoli, and Mr. Francis, surrounded by church dignitaries on the steps of the Missouri Building, June 8th. Miss Alice Roosevelt, daughter of the President of the United States, and visiting delegations posed for this camera picture on St. Louis Day. On Sunday afternoon, a popular spot to relax was on the West Lagoon between the Palace of Machinery and the Palace of Electricity. This is the South Lagoon looking westward from the Grand Basin, the Palace of Mines and Metallurgy on the right. This was the shopping center at the fair. Through this grand entrance passed thousands whose large pocketbooks came out later lighter. Beanville Bridge over the West Lagoon, the Palace of Transportation on one side, and the massive-looking outline of the Palace of Machinery on the other. This is the Palace of Transportation. the visitor was reminded of a great railroad station. In this building, there were 14 railroad tracks having a combined length of 4 miles. There were 60 entrances. Now we come to Constitution Avenue. This modern street was one of the main thoroughfares. Looks like these visitors are headed for one of the fine restaurants at the fair. Just a few blocks from our last scene, we arrive at the beautiful Marine Cafe. This was a swank rendezvous for connoisseurs of fine food. This beautiful building was the last to be torn down. A panorama of the Colonnade of States. The entire sweep was 2,000 feet from terminals. The architectural grandeur of this outstanding picture is evidence of man's accomplishments, which in 1904 graced the picturesque landscape in Forest Park. Can you imagine the great battleship Illinois on the lagoon in Forest Park? Probably one of the most outstanding attractions at the fair. The Palace of Education from the lagoon. When the exposition opened and the finished buildings were shown to the world, none captured the interest of visitors and judges of architecture as the Palace of Education. Thousands were attracted to the Fisheries Building, a structure of architectural splendor housing fascinating exhibits. Now, folks, we hope you have enjoyed our journey around the fair. Stay with us for a visit to the Pike. This famous statue of Remington's cowboys marked the entrance. The Temple of Neko on the Pike, built 3 centuries ago by one of the rulers of Japan as a portal to the mortuary of his grandfather. These Chinese actors were an obliging lot. Their theatrical performances attracted large audiences. This was the first public presentation by the Chinese Empire at a universal exposition. On the dedication of Pike Day, Governor Dockery opened the occasion with a speech. Among the listeners were Miss Alice Roosevelt, Prince Pulon of China, and President David R. Francis. These are the notables of the Sioux Nation. Chief Yellow Heron Council from South Dakota at the Government Indian Exhibit. This was Cairo on the Pike, a spectacular exhibit showing a procession of camels on the main street of Egypt. Several hundred patrons were served at one time in this typical Chinese restaurant, where the visitor could take his choice of chop suey made of chicken or beef for only $1. An exhibit on the Pike that attracted great attention, especially the children. The Eskimo dog trains. These husky fellows were as gentle as lambs. Creation was the big entertainment attraction on the Pike. Today, Creation is a headline attraction in amusement parks throughout the country. Don't go away, folks. Don't go away. You ain't seen nothing yet until you visit hereafter. In the language of the sideshow barker, this is it. And if you become thirsty, there's a coffee room to the left. Here we are at the snow-capped mountain resort, the Tyrolean Alps. Can you visualize 3,000 hungry people being served food and refreshment at one time in this beautiful garden? Now returning to the main promenade of the fair, it is July 4th. One of the most colorful events was the Liberty Bell Day procession. Thousands watched this procession passing the sunken garden. The Palace of Liberal Arts, Mines and Metallurgy in the background. Here we see the great American DeForest wireless telegraph tower that was in operation during the entire fair. Wireless messages by the DeForest system started from an ordinary Morse key. According to experts, the sound wave from this tower traveled at the rate of 186,000 miles per second. One of the greatest features of the fair, one of the wonders of the world which will never be forgotten, was the magnificent cascades. Here we see Festival Hall, Fountain of Central Cascades. Festival Hall was the home of the world's greatest organ. 10 cars were required to transport from Los Angeles the finished parts which entered the construction of the organ that thrilled millions of visitors at the fair. You are now looking at the Grand Basin and the Plaza of St. Louis, the Louisiana Monument in the background. A facade of exhibit palaces 600 feet apart face upon the lawn and terrace. And here's another view of the central cascade with fountains. The 14 statues of the states occupying places of honor form the background. This is a view of the West Falls. and the magnificent Palace of Electricity. The marvels of electrical development shown in the palace was probably the fair's most exciting spectacle. We are looking at the north facade of the Palace of Education, showing the promenade along the Grand Basin. This building, viewed from the West Lagoon, presented a most impressive picture of the truly beautiful buildings. It was 90 in the shade on July 4th when this picture was made. However, visitors stood for 2 hours listening to talks by officials. One of the few interior scenes captured by the camera was this view of the Palace of Horticulture. Here you see the citrus fruits section. The largest timepiece in the world, the 8th wonder of the world presented at the fair, was the floral clock. This wonder clock's hands each weighed 2,500 pounds. The minute hand was 74 feet long. This accurate timepiece told us when our day's work was over. Our work was so fascinating, we decided to linger around until nightfall to shoot a few scenes of the electrical displays. The beautiful illuminated palaces spread out over an area you have come to know as Forest Park. Let us repeat in closing. Written words fail. The camera only preserves the story. 1,000 chapters long of the greatest World's Fair in history, held in St. Louis, Missouri, the city beautiful on the banks of the mighty Mississippi. At midnight on December 1st, 1904, David R. Francis turned out the lights, and the great World's Fair was at an end.